Well, welcome to the Far-Reaching Ministries podcast. I am Edward Amaya, Director of Ghost Operations, and today I have the opportunity to sit down with Wes Bentley, the founder and CEO of Far-Reaching Ministries. It's been a pretty busy year for Wes, so we're going to get caught up on some things with ministry. Wes, it's really good to have you back in the U.S.
Thanks, brother.
It's been a long, hard year, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We're only halfway through it.
It's gone fast, but a tremendous amount of work in a short period of time.
And I understand in ministry, when things are a struggle out in the field, that at home it's always easy with your health and all that stuff. So,
yeah, I had 2 brutal years. I found out I had a nerve in my back of my neck that was absolutely crushed, and I actually for 2 years went around from doctor to doctor in America, and I could not get any answers. So finally, I prayed, and the Lord told me to call Debbie Domingo down in Mexico, and I did. And went down there, and one day I got more done. I got all the tests. It took me a year and a half to get done in one day, and I found out more answers in one day than I did 2 years in America, and that would lead to an operation. I have medical insurance that would cover the operation, but I couldn't wait another 6 months. The pain was it's amazing what a nerve can do to your body, but it just felt like my back was absolutely on fire, and yet I was traveling all over the world, going from front to front. It was a pretty brutal time, but God got me through it, thank God.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing, Wes. I got to see all that, and most people don't understand what a day in the life of Wes or at Far-Reaching Ministries, but the incredible pain, and yet I still saw what Paul said. I kind of recognized what Paul said, not only with that suffering, but you carry the weight of the church, carry the weight of the ministry. We're in over 30 countries, and we're in some pretty hot war zones, and yet you carried all that. How are you doing today? Pretty well. How do people pray for you specifically?
Well, I think for strength is probably the biggest need for both me and my wife. I'm very fortunate that I have a real helpmate. A lot of people in ministry don't have that. And, one of my heroes in the faith is the prophet Jeremiah, and we know that he served somewhere between 40 and 50 years. And matter of fact, God told him things that were going to be so bad that he was to never marry, that because of the war that would happen in Israel, that the women's bodies would lie dead in the street with nobody to bury them. And Jeremiah had to endure that. And yet, I've been fortunate enough to have a wife that when I went from my operation in Mexico, our hotel was literally 3 minutes away. And I asked her multiple occasions, I said, go get a good night's sleep. She wouldn't leave me. And she goes, no, you'll sleep better if I'm here. So for 3.5 days, 4 days, she was in the hospital the entire time. And I've been very fortunate that I have someone that really stands by my side and prays for me. And, Vicky and I get along extremely well. We never argue. And, but again, our hearts are still in ministry.
Wes, you don't see yourself as a hero, and it's really weird. You hear it all the time, and I see the look in your eyes. You don't take that compliment. You don't do anything. But a lot of people look at your life, and it has been really significant. I've known you for how many years? Since I was 19. And the one thing that I know about you is regardless of the pain, regardless of the pressure, regardless of what's happening in your life, you just do the right thing. For example, Vicky, you had women, because of who you are in ministry, they don't know guys like you, and a lot of women would have loved to have married, and you just didn't feel right. Now you're with Vicky. Could talk about that, because I think that's important too.
Yeah, for anybody who's going into ministry, one of the single most important things you'll ever deal with in your life is who you marry. And, I always tell guys there's only one thing you need to pray, and you ask God, who's the woman I'm supposed to take care of the rest of my life? And when the Lord tells you that, it's game over. Well, the Lord, at one point, I had never planned to marry. I felt like the work was too important. And to a point, I felt like I was like Paul. I could be satisfied by being single. Yet Vicky came to work for me. She worked for me for 3 years, and I would say that we're best friends, but by no means romantically involved. And then the Lord finally spoke to me and told me that, Vicky was going to be my wife. And that has been just such a great help to me. And for any guy that's out there in ministry, most guys look at the outside, and you do need to be attracted to your spouse. But more importantly, if the heart isn't right, you'll never do a lot in ministry. You can be, some can, but a lot of people can really be hindered in ministry. Over the years of traveling and speaking to churches, I've had many pastors come up to me and say, Wes, I'd love to go, but unfortunately my wife And I won't go into any more detail than that. But, one of the things that I have a message I teach to women, which they probably don't like the title, but it's called Helpmate or Hellmate. And, I taught it in Russia, and, quite a few women repented, but I just said, just because your husband is a pastor doesn't mean you have any rewards in heaven. If you don't live for Christ, you don't do anything. Why would you think God would give you a great reward? And is it your job to get in the fight with him every Saturday night before he teaches Sunday morning, or every Sunday morning, And, Edward, I can tell you that I've been blessed. Vicky's never been like that, She's always been a support, and she's in the Word all the time. But one of the singular most important things you'll ever do in your life, if you're going to be in ministry, is who you marry.
Weston, it means so much because the women, because I know the stories, and many people who listen will know some of your stories, but there were some amazing women that were interested. But you had learned a long time ago that if you don't listen to the voice of the Lord, it's just not going to work. And you did, and today you are married to a woman that we all look on her and just go, wow, it's pretty amazing the kind of love we have. It's the same, and I've known you for a long time. It's the same type of commitment you take into ministry.
Right.
And you really wait on the Lord, and then when the Lord gives you a clear direction, even against all odds. I mean, I even said, Wes, why are we doing that? Wes, that's dangerous. Why would you? And yet, when you hear the Lord, we do it and make such an impact. How do you get such a solid place with the Lord? Is it just years of obedience, or it just happens?
Well, I always tell people that obedience is a safety net for the believer. The very act of obedience will move the hand of God powerfully on your behalf, and I look at the church today, and my greatest fear is that I would ever do something to shame the name of Jesus Christ, and I look at how many pastors are falling into sin in their life, and I can truthfully think over my last 40 years of my life, I have probably had, that I was aware of, because truthfully I'm unaware. Vicky says I'm unaware of these things, but I probably had 3 or 4 women that actually made a pass at me. And strangely enough, it was women I was sharing Christ with. Once I was on a 747 going to Russia, and I spent 3 hours sharing with a girl, and literally thinking she's going to get saved. And then at the end of it, she let me know she wanted to be in a relationship. And she was married at the time, of course, and I told her, well, it doesn't work that way. And, I was able to talk to her and share the Lord. But, so many men are falling into sexual sin. And one of the reasons is 40, 50 years ago in America, men started becoming successful in ministry. You could have a big church, large amount of tithing coming in. You got invited to conferences. You got invited to speak at all these places. You became famous. You wrote books. And I think it's a great trap for many people in ministry. I've never written a book. And if the Lord tells me to, I will. I've thought about writing a will and hearing and knowing the will of God and the voice of God. But about my personal life, unless the Lord tells me to do it, I won't do it. But what happened in the persecuted church, success in ministry meant you lost your family. You went to prison. You were tortured, possibly killed. And it kept them holy because they realized that they didn't want to have anything between them and the Lord because of being in such a dangerous situation. Well, I think that men in the body of Christ today need to realize that you are in a dangerous situation, because Paul talks very much about the fact that he could do the work and miss the prize. And I do believe that once saved, always saved, but it's once truly saved. You can't be a person who compromises. And so I really encourage people, if that's a struggle in your life, get right with the Lord, and it doesn't do any good telling people. I've gone to so many conferences that talk about finishing well, running the race. The only thing that keeps you pure with Jesus is being fanatically in love with the Lord and passionate about Him. That keeps you clean.
Amen. When I first connected with you, we've been friends for a long time. You were working in Russia, and I knew you had a love for that. And then the next time we connected, you were in Sudan, and Sudan is a testimony of God's power in today's age, and that would have been enough. But you continue to listen to the voice of the Lord and expand it. We could spend the rest of this time just talking about Sudan or the Nuba Mountains or what you're doing in North Sudan. We could even talk about some of the expansion the ministry's done. Iran, great story. What's happened in Iraq, Pakistan. so many things that we don't even get to talk about as a ministry, and you're not even looking for it to be talked about. But I do want to bring it home a little bit. We have been involved in a place called Afghanistan for a while, and it doesn't make the news anymore. And I'd like to talk about what the Lord is doing there, and why did you get involved in that?
Well, the reason I got involved is because we had 20 missionaries in the underground with their extended families, about 200 people. And I got a call from the Dutch office, and they were the people that were on the ground handling things for us. We were funneling money to people in the underground in Afghanistan, and they said, "You're all going to be killed for their faith." And so, of course, I went down to the staff and I said, we're going into wartime operations. And 1 week later, 5 former Navy SEALs would fly in, 3 former Marines, all special forces, 1 Army Green Beret, and 1 brother with the CIA, and we planned operations into Afghanistan. Now, it has been extremely successful, and, I was amazed at, I think that one of the things is you realize the trust that people put in you, and I think pastors need to realize this, because overnight our support doubled. I mean, literally doubled after 23 years of ministry. It doubles in a year. That's not possible outside of the work of God. But what happened is all of the years of being faithful, when we told the body we're going into Afghanistan, they believed us and they supported us. And I don't know the exact count, and we're somewhere probably between 27 and 28, maybe even 2,900 people we've gotten out. Unfortunately, we're closing down operations, not because we can't get people out of the country. The bottom line is we can't get any countries to take them anymore. That's the real problem. We've got very few people in the United States. I mean, the doors just weren't open. Brazil was great about taking people, and there are a few other countries that were very kind about it. But even at this point, they've all come to the point that they've stopped allowing people to come in. And there's a great many people that they're just going to have to rely upon the Lord. The suffering will be great. I mean, so many stories of women and children in great danger that we were able to send an operation team and get them out, but they suffered a lot before we got them.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most eye-opening things about what we do, what Far Reaching Ministries is about. We're all about evangelism. We're all about discipleship. But where we serve, it's way more complicated, right? We have to deal with, for example, to get the people out of Afghanistan, you need a home. You got to think about passports and visas. And we had to have the right type of people that could fly around countries and deal with embassies and meet with prime ministers. I mean, it's a pretty complex thing what happened there.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was amazing to me is Luke, had been on our board for years. He now works for the ministry, so he's no longer on the board, but still a great part of our work. But Luke had been in the Marine Corps. He was a major, and then 22 years with the FBI. And literally 2 weeks before Afghanistan, he had gotten out. And so when Afghanistan went down, I called him. I said, "Listen, brother, I need your help." And he volunteered for, probably half a year without pay. And but he has that ability to go into countries. I remember he went to Brazil. Next morning after he gets to Brazil, he meets the office of the president, and the following day, whatever is there, New York Times, on the front page it said, Brazil and Far Reaching Ministries rescue people out of Afghanistan. That's a God thing. We don't have the ability to do those things, but it comes by faith, you take that step of faith, and then God opens doors for you. And he did do that, and he provided for us to be able to get the people out. Now, in all honesty, we raised about $5.5 million for the operation, but we probably spent $6.5 million. I don't have the final figures yet, but we had to take money that we didn't have, and thank God Lord had provided it to get these people out, but we just couldn't leave them there.
Yeah, and I wish people, and they don't know you, Wes, like I do, and you would never say anything, so I'm going to say it, but I remember with the decisions to spend more money, looking in your eyes when you did it, and you didn't even hesitate. It's the right thing to do, and that's what I want to talk about. It was the right thing to do to go in and take care of these people. It's not just the right thing to do to go and rescue people out of Christians out of a horrendous situation, but it's the right thing to do to help them get reestablished.
Right.
You think about that. You think about the pastor's car, or you think about, and nobody knows these things. You think about a pastor who's having heart problems, and you raise the money to make sure he can have heart surgery. You care about all that. I just wish more people had the heart you do. Obviously, I love and care about you greatly. In addition to what you were doing in Afghanistan, you have a heart for Russia. You've been going there for years, and this war, this invasion into Ukraine, and Talk to me a little bit about that, how it's been going on with all that.
One of the things that I want people to understand is that God does speak to you. I had always, Russia was always my first love. I went to Sudan out of obedience, and it's great. I mean, the people there consider me to be South Sudanese. I mean, many generals have told me I'm not an American, I'm South Sudanese, and I appreciate that. But, I would go to Russia every year for 2.5, 3 weeks, and truthfully, it was a time to recoup from the war. I loved the fellowship, I loved the ministry, and I would normally leave on the 26th or 27th of December, and Russia shuts down from the 31st to the 10th for a holiday, January, 31st December to 10th of January. And it's a great time to do ministry. And I was literally in Russia in 2022. I was probably around 17th or 18th of January. And I called my wife, Vicky, and I said, honey, I don't know why, but the Lord has told me that the season of working in Russia, my life is over with. I'm not coming back. And she said, but it's your favorite place to go. I said, I know, but I know it's the voice of the Lord. Well, none of us expected the Russians to invade 30 days later. But that tells me that God does have the ability to speak to us and lead us and guide us. And now one of the things when we train Russians, we have to take them out of the country to work with the people that we're training. And I have to be very careful about what I'm speaking about that. We have to, we're going into the Ukraine and training Ukrainian chaplains and supporting them, and also supporting children, abandoned children, orphan children. There's a tremendous need there.
When we got involved in Ukraine, well-meaning people talked to you, and both you and myself at different churches. And to summarize, it's basically like, what are you doing in Ukraine? They're corrupt. And I know your heart about all that is maybe the government is corrupt. Maybe the government in Russia is corrupt. You live in the United States, and I think you're aware that the government here could be pretty corrupt. It's never been about the government. It's never been about the color of skin. It's never been their nationality. And I appreciate about your heart. Talk to me about that. Why do you care about all people?
Well, one of the things that we need to understand is when a person dies without Christ, they die for eternity. We actually have people that we work with in Russia that are on the Russian side leading people to Christ, and then we have people on the Ukrainian side. And, when I wake up every morning, I pray for the young boys of the Russian army and the Ukrainian army. Not for victory for the Russians, because, they invaded Ukraine. Ukraine did not invade them. But I realize that there's so many young men that went to this war because they're soldiers, they're called, they have to obey, but they don't want to be there. And, I think the latest estimates is they're losing about 30,000 a month that are dying. And that's very tragic for me to think of a 2-year-old boy or young man, and he's never got the chance to live his life, and he loses his life over there. And so, our goal is to take the gospel to the lost world. A lot of people, I would say there's definitely that group that's very pro-Russian. They believe the propaganda, but Putin had written a book about 20 years ago, and he stated that he wanted to reform the old Soviet Union. So this is a plan that he's enacted. And, it's very hard for me to deal with this. I think about all the Christmases I spent in Russia, because it's January 7th is Easter Orthodox Christmas. And, nobody decorates better for Christmas than the Russians do. It was amazing what they did. And, taking toys to children and meeting with families and bringing food. It was a great time of fellowship, and the people were so appreciative, and we would go up to a home, and I would go in to bring food into an elderly woman, and you'd literally open their refrigerator and there'd be a half a fish, and that's it. A half a fish is all they could afford, or a quarter stick of butter. And, when you bring the food, they would just cry. And, of course, we tell them that God loves them, and, we try to provide enough food for 6 months to get them through to the summer. A lot of them own dachas, which are gardens they can grow at that time. And we're still continuing those operations into Russia, and we're doing the same in the Ukraine. But, the Bible says it's the love of God that compels people unto repentance. So the way that people get saved is when they know that you love them. And so it's very important that they feel that from us, and it's genuine. And I've always said that if the Lord told me I can go back to Russia, I would move back tomorrow, but I know that's never going to happen. Doesn't mean that I don't love the people in Sudan. I do. I've got many deep, close relationships there. But again, the Lord had put Russia in my heart. I prayed for it 13 years before I went there. I served for about 5 years. and now I've been in Sudan for almost 30 years. And for the last 15, 16, 17 years, it's been going back to Russia to do ministry. That all ended in January 2022. So
I know your love and your connection for years with a lot of the pastors and their families, and I know you care about them so much that even during this time you're going to meet with a bunch of them in a non-Russian state and just love on them because of that commitment. And at the same time, you were in Ukraine, from what I understand. Talk to me about it. What's Ukraine like right now?
Well, the hard part with Ukraine that we're experiencing right now is how many children have lost parents. I heard about one pastor that he had 5 kids and he was called up to the front, and within 30 days he was dead. And he left behind a wife and children and no money to support them. The other things that happen in the East, you always have people that are bad in every country, but people would abandon their handicapped children. You drive into a city, there's a little Down syndrome little boy or girl sitting on the curb, and if you can imagine that, or a mentally handicapped one, and they've got this look in their eyes of they don't know where mom and dad is, they don't know what's going on, they're scared. And for me, I just can't handle stuff like that. We had a situation, Vitaly, that we're working with, great brother. He was actually born in the Ukraine. His parents immigrated to America. He grew up as an American. He didn't identify with being Ukrainian. Was successful in business, but then felt called to go back and become a missionary. He's been there for 11 years. Did a lot of work to help Samaritans first, so they really loved him. Vitaly felt led to work with us. And one of the things that Vitaly told me, he said that, one day he called his wife and he said, "Do you mind if I bring home a 7-month-old baby girl?" And she said, "What's going on?" He said, "The mother's into prostitution and she hasn't been home for 3 days. The diaper hasn't been changed, no milk, no water, the baby has not been held." It was a miracle that child survived. Now, unfortunately, it had to be taken to emergency, and before they could get any paperwork to get the baby, the mother came and grabbed it and took off. There's nothing to stop her from doing that. Now, that's not the end of the story for me. I'm determined to find that child. And I'm going to be talking to Vitaly even today about this. I want to locate her and make sure that she's safe. Another father, he left the Ukraine, moved to Poland, got himself a new girlfriend. I don't know if his wife was dead or gone, but she wasn't in the picture. He left behind 3 children. The oldest was 8, and the youngest was maybe 3 or 4. And he just left them, And when you see things like that, I can't bear it. It hurts me too much. And one of the reasons we know that God's in this is that, when we wrote about it to our donors, we needed to buy the land. We needed to go through the first phase in building the first dorm, which we hope will hold 100 children, and then a cafeteria. Well, that was about $600,000. Within 6 weeks, all that money came in. Now, that's where you say, if you ask anything in my name, it'll be given you. And we'll probably have another 4 or 5 phases of that orphanage, but I won't ask for the money until we get the first 2 completed. But I know people, they don't think it fits my personality, but in old age, I can see myself living there and just at nighttime holding babies in my arms and feeding them a bottle. I mean, I remember when my daughter and son were small and how you feed them the bottle and they hold them in your hand and they look into your eyes and they just keep filling with their little hands, and it's safety. And, in our orphanage, I don't want it to be an orphanage, I want it to be a home. And the people that we have in there are going to need to have a real passion for children, because all of these children, they need to be loved. And Americans have a thing that they don't understand. I recognized it over my years in ministry, but I remember being up on stage and I had a bunch of children were up there performing, and all the Americans were out watching these children. And all of a sudden I realized that all of their eyes were pointed to one direction. Well, where's the beautiful little girl thing? The rest of the children nobody paid attention to. And Americans don't realize they do it. They're just drawn to it. But we need to learn that the child that isn't so lovely by the world standards, to look at them and let them know they're just as important. And so, people say, how many children will you have in your orphanage? Well, as many as God provides for. If we can build an orphanage eventually that has 5,000 children, we'll do it. But, that's in God's hands, not mine.
Yeah, I've been able to witness firsthand and your care for children, or what we did in Afghanistan. It's not just the rescue, and the church would celebrate that, right? But it's how did they have a quality of life because of the trauma, the turmoil, the things that have gone on in Latin America, the children that have been sexually trafficked.
Right.
You're caring more about them when they're not just now, but when they're 14 and 16 and 30 and 45. And
Right.
it's really beautiful. And I see the same thing going on in Ukraine. So that's children. But yet I also know you have an incredible heart for the elderly that can't take care of themselves. I saw it in Russia. Talk to me about what we're doing in Ukraine.
Well, last year we built several, it was either 202 or 203 temporary homes. Luke oversaw that project. I just raised the money. He took care of it. And actually, Luke raised a good portion of it too. And he sent out and got a gift from believe it or not, it was an art company. And they gave about $200,000. But we were able to build container homes. And these, they're only about 20 feet long, but it has a bedroom, a small kitchen, a shower, a bathroom, a place to sit down. And we take them to the site where the home's been destroyed. We set it up, hook it up to the water and electricity. And if anybody's ever been in Russia or the Ukraine, you know that the old Soviet apartments were much bigger than that. And so they're extremely happy. And, but there's so many elderly, they got to the point that they were committing suicide. I mean, they weren't getting their pension, didn't have any kids in the picture, and so
Lost everything.
And they don't know how to survive. Well, you're 65 years old and you think, I've got no one, I can't eat, I can't take care of myself, I have to beg. For some people, they think it's just better to end it. And we want them to know that isn't God's plan for their life. And I remember we had one gentleman in Russia years ago, and he had two sons. One went off to the Afghan war, one went off to the Chechen war. Both of them died. And he said that he worked at a wine factory for 40 years with his wife. And he said, when communism fell, he never dreamed that he would not have this umbrella to take care of him. He said, but in his old age, he was having to beg for food, and he never thought life would be so miserable. And he said, then Christians from America, and it wasn't me, I mean, we provided the food, but our staff over in Russia came there and started bringing him enough food to get him to the month. And he said, it wasn't just food, it was wonderful food, and to tell you what their diet's like, for them, wonderful food is being able to have kind of an oatmeal for breakfast or some canned meat, and this is what I try to tell people, that, when we take in orphans, they need to have meat on their plate at night too. They need to have, be able to go to the dentist, and, when you're supporting a child, you need 4.5 full-time groups of people. For example, the orphanage down in South America probably has about 8 to 12 people on staff every 8 hours. Then you got to take in days off. So you can't support a child with one sponsor, nor can you support an elderly person in the Ukraine or Russia. And so we try to raise enough to make sure they can eat and pay their heating bills and have some quality of life. But the money that we raise, we're not using it for other things. I don't see children or elderly as a way to make money for our ministry. We trust God for that. All the money that we're raising is going to be used for those projects, and we are setting up funds so that the way our world's going, who knows if the economy would crash someday. I want to have at least 5 years of income for each of those children. And when they turn 18, we intend to have little homes built where maybe 4 girls will share a 2-bedroom apartment, or 4 boys. And they can live there until they are able to get on their own feet, have a job. We need to be able to send them to trade school or college. But a lot of people, once they turn 18, they put them on the streets because they don't have anything set up to take care of them. And they end up right back into the prostitution that they were pulled out of. So our intention is, again, to show people God's love and care. And with the elderly, I know that we've had women that have been wounded, shot in combat. We had a mother with a handicapped daughter, and the handicapped daughter was 40 years old, but she was mentally only 6 years old. And, we ended up buying them an apartment, which they're quite expensive now because of what's going on. There's not a lot of free open property because nobody's building. And then we found out that the mother has tumors. And, one thing that I told the mother was that we would make sure that her daughter was taken care of and loved, that she'd be with a Christian family. She'd always have a hot meal on the table. She'd always have heating in the winter and clothing and medical care. Because if I were a father and I was dying and I had no one to take care of my child, nothing would be more important to me than that.
You know, Wes, one thing you've said since I've been young and I've been able to watch you for a while is that as a man, as Christians, we're called to lead from the front. You have to set the example. You can't just tell people. And I've seen you do that forever. I've seen, even what we're talking about now, how you go to the far extreme just to love on people. And what I want to bring out right now, and you will never do this, I'm doing it because I really respect you. But everything you've talked about, and yet you're also jumping on a plane to go to an undisclosed country to bring some pastors out of a closed country to encourage them. You're going down to Latin America to try to bring attention and really encourage the church down there to fight against child sexual trafficking. You're sending me back to Ukraine, and you were in Ukraine doing all of that. But I also understand that you and Vicky actually went to the front because you wanted to encourage the church that is living under just incredible hard times.
Yeah, we visited 3 different fronts during the time we were there, plus a city that was under siege. And I remember being in this church, and literally, it's packed, 700-800 people at least. Every chair is taken. There's not any space available. Well, one of the things that struck me is that when the war came, the pastor fled, the assistant pastor fled, the worship team fled, all the young people left. All that was left was the elderly people. And amazingly, the person that took over was a female officer in the military, and she chose to start pastoring that church. And she's very dynamic, and how can you falter? I mean, none of the men were willing to stay, which I can't imagine a pastor leaving this flock like that. And but he did. Well, they had me teach for about 20 minutes, and I counted over 150 incoming artillery shells in that time. The people didn't see. An artillery shell makes a certain sound when it's coming in right on top of you. So they got used to knowing when it wasn't if one's coming close, they all dive for the floor. But during that time, they just sit there and listen to the message, and we try to encourage them. At the front lines, we were fortunate because the days that we were there, it's winter, and there was a lot of overcast clouds and rains because the drones were in the area. And I remember being in one underground bunker. I can't tell you what, they were special operations for the Ukrainian military. Now, 3 days after we left, the guys in the bunker were safe, but their unit outside was obliterated. They were sitting in these glide bombs that have, it's a bomb they launched from an airplane. It's got wings and it glides in. It's been developed from this war. And it's got 3,300 pounds of TNT, and it clears about 3 football fields. And they were launching 70 to 100 of these a day. And, we went in there, we encouraged them. We even gave the soldiers money for their families, because, love isn't just saying, give them an inscription, but, when you know that their families are back home or hungry, we gave them money to help their families. And they were very, very thankful for it, after I left, one of our senior chaplains in the Ukrainian military, he was in an area, and he had rolled down his window, and a drone blast hit not far from him, and he woke up a couple of days later in the hospital. He doesn't remember it. Fortunately, he was had a concussion, and he wasn't severely wounded. He's already back at the front lines, but it's very intense when you're there because you never know if you've got a drone hunting in your vehicle. We have armed vehicles to drive in when we go there, but when those drones can blow up a Russian tank, trust me, they can take out an armored vehicle. I think the only peace that you can have in it is if it does hit your vehicle, you'll just wake up in heaven, I think probably the biggest fear I would have in being in these areas is having a bomb hit far enough away that it tears your body apart and you're suffering. And I've seen that happen. We have 2 chaplains in one city, and there was an elderly person that needed food in their house, so they picked up the food and ran it into the place. Well, the Russians targeted, and they could see these are civilians getting food. They sent an artillery shell, and when they came back out, one man ran in to take food, came back out, his wife's dead. There was another woman, and I'll never forget it. It was very traumatizing to see. She literally had one leg turned backwards and was literally in an angle up behind her back. blood coming from everywhere. You could see the shock in her face. And all of a sudden I realized that the blast had blown off the front part of her jacket. Her breast was actually exposed. She was probably in her 70s. How undignified way to die as an elderly person. And, I was a soldier, and I was very good with weapons. And guys, I can tell you that even at great distances, not even without a scope, just iron sights, I could tell the difference between civilians and soldiers. You can see very distinctly. So when someone targets that, they know they're civilians, and it's a terrible crime to see what's going on there. There's been a tremendous amount of rape of the Ukrainian women. I mean, we met a woman chaplain that was over there with the Ukrainian military. She was actually from America, but born Ukrainian, and we could tell she was afraid. But she was going from front to front, and there was also a British guy there that I'm sure that he was a private contractor or mercenary. And the reason he got talking to me, we had stopped at a gas station to fuel up, and only place we could find food. It's kind of like an AM/PM. They had hot dogs in there. I think we lived off hot dogs, and I'd seen a dog outside, so I was outside feeding the dog, and apparently he liked animals too, because he came up, he would thank me for feeding the dog, and we got to know them, and they were telling us about the incredible amount of rape of women there, where soldiers came in and just raped them. And, here's where women are being raped in front of their husbands, and then having their husband shot afterwards. And there's, and don't get me wrong, there's bad people in every military, but there is a proper way to fight a war. The Russian soldier, if they're commanded by the army, can fight a noble war. You fight to defeat the enemy. But when you start raping women and killing children and elderly, that's not a noble way to fight a war. That's people.
And Wes, I could listen to you for hours more, and I know we have to come to a close at this particular session, but thank you for taking the time to do this. I just want to let you know, as I'm listening to you, I have a faith with Christ that means a lot, but you inspire me to want to live my faith out. When I see people that just go and sit in churches, my heart breaks for them, because the lives that they could have by glorifying Jesus and tell stories that literally could seem like they're coming out of the book of Acts. So I bless you, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening in today. And if you would hear my heart on this, as often as the Lord puts Wes, our far-reaching ministries, on your heart, please pray for us. If you have any questions, give us a call. You can always find us online at frmusa.org or Far Reaching Ministries through Google, and we have Facebook accounts. See you next time.